people that we work with across the state. So I am titling this presentation, Conveying Community Impact Data in a Compelling Way. Before I do that, I just wanted to remind us all that we all digest information differently. Some of us are auditory learners. We learn best by hearing. Others are kinesthetic learners that we need to touch and feel something. And others are visual learners that we need to see something. In all likelihood, we're probably a combination of these types of learning behaviors. But it's not surprising to know that almost 2/3 of people have their predominant learning style as a visual learner. So it's very important that when we convey information and data, that we think carefully about how that's going to be conveyed and what image is being used to convey that. I'll talk a little bit about how we collect the data and how we convey some of that data to our stakeholders within community and economic development in New Hampshire. We have a variety of tools that we use to collect the data. We use surveys quite frequently, surveys to collect basic demographic information about race, gender identity, age, geography, a whole variety of demographic characteristics. We also collect data on how satisfied were our participants in our programs. We collect data post-process. If we do a visioning process, for example, we want to know what did people actually do, what changes actually came about as a result of that process. So surveys are one mechanism, but we also use a lot of focus groups, key informant interviews, and a lot of qualitative ways to collect data from our stakeholders and our constituents that we work with from a programming perspective. All of this data, or I should say some of this data, goes into our fancy reporting system. Many of you may use the logic model reporting system. I take no credit for it. So it's a little bit clunky, it's a little bit outdated, but it does seem to work for our purposes. We enter all of our activities that we do, as well as the impacts that we have into this system. And I wish there was a simple button, an easy button that you could just simply press and all of this data would get compiled and turned into these simple graphics. But alas, it's not so. We actually have to take a lot of the data that we collect in this reporting system and import it into other programs, Excel and other. This is just a sampling of some of the programs that are out there. A lot of folks may use Tableau. Tableau really has nice outputs for conveying data, but it's not exactly easy to manage, at least from my perspective. It's a little complicated. And what I found is that there's no single system that's the best system for conveying data. They either require a lot of work on the front end to set it up, or they're not as easy or queryable as we'd like to have on the back end. So if any of you ever find a system that works for you, I hope that'll be part of our dialogue in the end, that we can share what we use and how we convey data as well. I'm going to walk you through a case study in New Hampshire of one example of how we collect data and how we disseminate it. We have a program called Nature Groupie, and I'll say that this is not a program that I'm currently involved with, but it's essentially a way for conservation organizations in the state of New Hampshire and New England, in fact, who have volunteer needs to be able to connect to volunteers. So it's essentially a website that has a pretty fancy back end, but it brokers that connection between conservation organizations with volunteer needs and volunteers looking for an opportunity to do something. We have several hundred organizations that are part of this network, and we have well over 1,000 volunteers that volunteer regularly for this program called Nature Groupie. And we collect the data when people register for a volunteer event. It could be pulling an invasive species. It could be a beach cleanup. It could be demarcating the boundaries of a conservation easement, water quality testing. It could be a variety of things. When they volunteer, they use Salesforce. And Salesforce, for those of you who don't use it, it's a pretty sophisticated contact management system that we use to collect information about our constituents and our clientele, their demographics, what sorts of workshops they've signed up for, what interests do they have, and we can collect a lot of this information. It doesn't have a very neat function for being able to provide graphics directly to you, so we oftentimes pull this information out into Excel and use Excel to crunch some of the numbers, but it does give you some interesting functions. This is an example of a chart that we looked at. We started to look at Nature Groupie, this program, to find out how many events are marketed, how many jobs are posted to this network, and what's the volunteer sign up for those events. So in this chart, you can see we track it by season. So this helps us understand what seasons tend to be the highest volunteer seasons. It helps us think about efficiency for the number of jobs posted. What's the uptake? How many volunteers are we actually getting to sign up for that? So this really helps us to think and stratify over time the picture of what volunteerism looks like within this network. We also are able to capture the addresses for the volunteers in this network. And this has proven really useful. We've pulled this into Tableau, and we've created a bubble map that shows where our volunteers are from. And it helps to know where the most volunteer opportunities are occurring, but it also helps us to think about where might there be more opportunities to engage volunteers in the network in more activities, or do more outreach to conservation organizations so that they can promote their volunteer events through the network. So these are really powerful tools that we use internally to help us make decisions, but they can also be very powerful for conveying the impact and the number of volunteers that we have by region and across the state. And our funders like to see this sort of information. This is just a more generalized infographic that we've created about volunteerism in the state of New Hampshire. We find that we have, when people think about volunteerism and cooperative extension, that's one of the lifebloods. It's one of the things that drives the work that we do, both at the community level and across the state. So we like to convey that impact and the number of hours worked and the value of those hours across the state. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and this is maybe unexpected from what you might hear in a data viz presentation. I also think about a visual doesn't have to be a graph or a chart. It can also be an image. So I'm going to tell you the story of Franklin, New Hampshire. Franklin, New Hampshire is a city. It's a small city of about 7,000 people located in central New Hampshire. It's gone through some hard times. It's an old mill town. It's lost a lot of its industry. It has an underperforming school. It has a lot of social issues, a high substance use and misuse rate. It has a tax cap, so there's not enough money to fix the buildings. And so this town has a number of challenges that it's trying to work through, but it also has a lot of opportunities. It has these beautiful buildings. At least they were beautiful at one point. They need a little bit of tender, loving care to rehab them back into a usable state. So Extension engaged in a process there a few years ago to help the community establish a vision for what it wanted to be in the future. And the focus was making Franklin a vibrant place for people of all ages. So we took them through a variety of different ways of collecting information. We did a storytelling. We went to different venues, including the senior home and to schools, to sort of hear what people's stories were, not only from the past in Franklin, but what they would wanted and envisioned their community to be like. We had kids take pictures of the community. We had a forum where a lot of this information was culminated. And at that forum, we actually had a number of architects that were there that were actually creating in real time a series of renderings. So this is where I think this is data viz, because we're taking qualitative input from the community from a variety of different mechanisms. And the architects were creating a rendering of what they perceived the community, what their future desire and state would be in the community. And the community got to tweak that, and they got to provide input. And in the end, we had a series of probably 30 renderings of what the town could be. And people reacted and responded well to it. We had a lot of volunteers jump onto these volunteer committees to help make these action committees work and start to revitalize the downtown. This particular rendering was a vision for what they wanted the main street to look like, with flower pots, safe crosswalk, street cafe. And to some degree, some of that has happened. A new coffee shop has opened. And so this is a powerful way to convey a future vision. This is another vision focused on the recreation of the town. It's the place where three rivers meet, and it has an incredible recreation potential. So people in the community saw this as a place where kayakers could come and where the river would be a vibrant place and not a closed off place that was inaccessible behind a fence. And so they drew this rendering the architects drew it based on the input from the community. And sure enough, today, they're talking about putting a major whitewater park there, which is going to potentially be a huge generator of revenue. A new kayak store has opened up. And so a lot of these visions are actually coming to fruition because people could see what this vision, they could get a visceral sense of what that vision was, and they wanted to put some skin in the game and help out with it. This is another, an old mill building that was dilapidated. They thought about tearing it down, but people had a vision for turning this into workforce housing for people of all ages. And sure enough, they were able to secure financing from a number of lenders and a community development corporation to be able to rehab this place. And I think there are around 50 new units of workforce housing in the community that's right in the downtown. And it's helped to create a vibrancy in the downtown because these people are now shopping in the downtown area. So I wanted to show this because I think we think of data viz as a way to show graphical information in chart form, but they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think this was an effective way of conveying that future vision. This is one of the infographics that we created as a result of it. Personally, I think the pictures and the images from the architectural renderings were more powerful, but this is sort of a summary of some of the outcomes and impacts of the work. So this is how to contact me if you have questions. We'll all be on the call after, so you can ask anything. So I'll hand it back to Sridhar and to, I think Christopher is the next presenter, correct?
Yes, Chris Seeger is going to go next. Chris is a professor and extension specialist in landscape architecture and geospatial technology at Iowa State. And he's also an expert in data visualization. So I will let Chris take over.
Okay, first, I think everybody hear me?
Yep.
And you should be able to see my slides.
As well, yes.
Yep, okay, good. All right, so yeah, thank you for the introduction, and Charlie, enjoyed your presentation. I got to preview it over the weekend, but it's good hearing the explanation that went with it. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here at Iowa State University and how we've gone about building up a data set in which we share with both our extension employees as well as the public. So one of the things we were most interested in is helping our extension team make effective decisions, and that really meant they needed to have good data that was up to date. And so we want our extension specialists to pretty much be experts of all things, but definitely experts in what's happening in their research area in their region of the state. And so we're trying to help them make informed decisions, and a way we knew we could do that is by putting together some form of a central repository. Some of the problems that we're trying to achieve and help our clientele with, reducing the challenges associated with data, included that involved that accessing the data, well, it's on the internet, it's all over the place. Getting the up-to-date information can often be tedious. Maybe you have to make numerous visits to a website, especially as websites keep changing. Even the Census Bureau would move where some of its files are at. And if you're a person that writes a grant maybe once or twice a year, it can be really tough to find that data. There's actually so much data that sifting through and finding what data is the best data to use can often be difficult. There could be a lack of technical ability to work through some of the data that you have. Complex geospatial and visualization tools. Case in point, teaching a class right now in which some of our students are using the free and open source QGIS software. Latest version of that software doesn't run very well on some older computers. They're still stuck without the ability to visualize the data, even if they know how, just because they don't have a computer that can run the newer tool, and it's hard to find the older free software. The other thing is that sometimes public users or even our staff, they don't have some of the educational experience in that topic matter that they're interested in or looking at to be able to break apart the data that they have into some form of actionable ideas. But of course, then there's also duplication of efforts where the data is easy to get, but it takes a little bit of time to work with the data, make your own graphs and whatnot, and that just costs extra time and money that wouldn't be necessary. So our solution was to put together a data portal, I guess, provide the data centrally, and make sure that that data was up to date and it was in a format that we could present it, which would be an unbiased take on the data. We want to make sure we could visualize tabular data because that was one of the most standard types of data that we had that we were working with. Being able to join data from multiple sources together so people could do correlations if they needed to. Share all the research data that was brought into us from other faculty or other extension, And then also one we're playing around with is the ability to customize your reports and pick and choose which data might be included in it. Now, of course, on the back end of everything, we have a standard data portal. And I'm not going to go into that today, but just know that that exists at the center core of what we're doing. I'm more interested in sharing with you some of the other indicator program products that are derived out of that. These include our Data for Decision Makers, our Iowa Government Finance Initiative, our Marketmaker, which is in partnership with Eggmark, community infrastructure data, and then also we have a component that's Sandy, and she's actually on here today too, that works with the data literacy workshops. So as we look at our reports, we knew that we wanted to have some type of report that could be updated frequently or very easily. We used to produce at the university reports every year, every few years, this kind of snapshot of demographics or other types of data. But they became stale really quick. You know, they got printed in bulk, 500 or whatever copies of it. And they went out to the county offices and they sat there on the shelf, and someone might come and pick them up. And but they were outdated really quickly. So we want to make sure we can produce something that was up to date. This example you see here right now on the screen is an example of one of our reports. This is a city profile. I just want you to take note to our population pyramid. This is where Iowa State University is located. So we have a funny pyramid because we have a strong count of students between the ages of 20 to 24, which is kind of an awkward looking pyramid. But anyways, our series is called the Data for Decision Makers. And here's an example of a county data for decision maker. And again, we start out, we show all the cities that are in the county, their population in 2000, 2010. I talked about it being up to date. As soon as the new population estimates come out for the cities, we update our data portal database, and all of our products that read from that database are automatically updated. We don't have to go in and make any changes. It just pulls the newest data, changes the headers for us, and this information is available. Here's another example from Polk County. And in Polk County, you can see that they have a little bit more normalized population pyramid. But typically, these reports are about 4 pages in length. They'll have comparisons in our county ones between the county and the state averages, so counties can see how they're doing. There's a wealth of different metrics that are in these reports. And they're fairly easy to read. You can go right to what you want to find. There's a paragraph that's usually above them or on the page that kind of just summarizes what's happening. And again, all that's dynamically created through code that we've written that talks between our database and these reports. Now, we provide multiple geographies in our reports. I've already showed you that we had a county report. We have 99 counties in Iowa. And then we also have cities. We have a city report. We also have our extension region, which you see right here, an example from the northwest corner of the state, as well as an Iowa House and Senate districts, the data, various data for those 2 districts. This one's kind of interesting. I was looking at this earlier. Here you can see from 1980 to 1990 that this area of Region 1, this is a farm, definitely a farm area, the population decline. That would have been about the time of the farm crisis that was going on. And you can see it was pretty severe. It dipped below the state average quite a bit, and it has remained below the state average. So in addition to multiple geographies, we also have multiple themes. Like I said, each of these are about 4 pages in length. We have one focused on demographics, which is our top row here. And like I said, it's 4 pages. We have one on focusing on health. We have one focusing now on housing. And the one over on the right here is a 4-H. Our 4-H profile is actually 8 pages. We do pull in data from the 4-H organization, but we also pull in some education and other youth data along with this. And the intent is for local 4-H leaders to help have a better understanding of how the program is changing over the year. Now, sometimes people don't know what district they're in, especially if it's an extension region or legislative district. So part of the interface for selecting your report is a really important thing. to show people the geographic space or the map. So they can just click on the region that they're interested in, and then this report is created on the fly for them. Also note in the 4-H report in the bottom right corner, we always have contact information. So your local county contact or regional contact's name is listed there. Or if counties want to have their director, or maybe they have a youth specialist's name, that's what we will put into those reports as the contact. The next item we have is something called the IGFI, or the Iowa Government Finance Initiative. This also pulls demographic data out of our repository, but in addition, we have a colleague that is working with communities and economic data. We worked with the state to get the annual budget reports that cities submit at the end of the year, showing how they spent their money, and we were able to collate all that together, pull in these individual reports. We have multiple years of data, and so we can show trend data now going back to 2009 in some cases through, I guess it'd be 2017. They can see 5 years worth of data to see how have their budgets changed over the year, how has demographics changed in their community, and they can start to get some per capita spending and what have you. There is an additional version of this. This is all, both of these are free. The Data for Decision Makers and this Iowa Government Finance Initiative program are free programs we provide. We do have a paid version of the IGFI report, which goes into a deeper level of analysis and does more side-by-side community comparisons between a community and other communities from its peer group based on size of the community and location. Another one we have here is our Marketmaker reports. And Marketmaker, in this case, we are working with the national group Marketmaker. They have a web interface, but they want to be able to make some reports based upon a commodity that was selected. And so we're still kind of in our first prototype for this, but we're exploring the ability to bring maps into our PDF reports. So we'll have, in addition to having dynamic graphs and bar charts and what have you, we'll also start to have geospatial data that automatically comes into the maps or into these reports and then prints nice and clear like you'd expect a map should. But here we're trying to go grab data from the USDA, bring it in to show past trend information on, in this case, how were apple sales or production in that region of interest the last 3, 4, 5, or 10 years. We also work with research, specifically transportation research, because that's where my interest is at, in helping communities make informed decisions. We'll go out and do surveys in the field with the public using a technique called volunteer geographic information. And in this case, maybe we're walking around the community and we're mapping infrastructure and bringing it in. We work with OpenStreetMap data, find that to be a great source of data, not just as a place to go get data and bring it in for analysis, but also as the repository for where we do our data collections to push data back up to, store it, and then bring it back in. So instead of us having to maintain a library of all the streets in Iowa, we can piggyback off of OpenStreetMap. So finally, the things we're trying to do, going beyond having just a data portal, we're hoping are making things a lot easier for our clientele to use. We know we get a lot of requests to add more data, so we're continually working on adding even more data as we find it into our system. I think that concludes my part of the presentation, so we'll save questions till the end, I guess.
Thank you, Chris. Next up would be Ann Carpenter. She's a Senior Community and Economic Development Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, trying to share my slides now. Sorry, first time doing this in this format. How does that look?
You look good.
Okay, all right. So again, I'm Ann Carpenter. I was actually recently appointed our Director of Policy and Analytics in our Community and Economic Development Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And so I'm less familiar with this group, and I assume that many of you are less familiar with what we do. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes just kind of talking about our mission, the activities we engage in community development, and then I'll show you a number of tools that we've been developing here at the Atlanta Fed, and then in other system banks throughout the country. We're, of course, broken up into regional banks, which I'll show you on the next slide. I do need to give this disclaimer that these comments are my own and not those of the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And I also just want to say thank you for the introduction, or for the invite to speak on this webinar. So I think I've already learned a lot, and I'm excited to get feedback from you all. So just to briefly kind of give the lay of the land with the Federal Reserve System, again, I work in the Atlanta Fed, so we cover the southeastern United States. We have 3 full states and kind of 3 half states. We cover Alabama, Georgia, Florida, half of Tennessee, the eastern half, and then the southern halves of Mississippi and Louisiana, along with the other 11 regional reserve banks and the Board of Governors. We make up what's called the Federal Reserve System. So I know this is a national audience, and some of you may be covered by my district, the Atlanta Fed District, or know of our colleagues in our branch cities that you can see here in Birmingham, Jacksonville, Miami, New Orleans, and Nashville. But others of you may sit in other districts of the Federal Reserve. And so I welcome you to reach out if you want to make better connections with your Federal Reserve community development specialists within your own region. But together as a system, you know, we're responsible for setting monetary policy, for the payment system, cash and checking, and also for supervising and regulating our nation's banks. So as part of that duty, we are also responsible for regulating the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA. And CRA was established in the late 1970s to address redlining and discriminatory lending. Since that time, so that's about 40 years ago, each of the banks had established their own community development program or community affairs program. But this kind of system function has evolved over time quite a bit. So I would say that across the board, the mission of all of the banks is similar. It's kind of to activate, especially financial capital, but also human and social capital within the low and moderate income communities that we serve within our specific districts, and then as a nation as a whole. But in Atlanta, we've shifted our focus a bit more onto building an evidence base around, first of all, tracking what issues are most acute in our district in the Southeast, especially in these areas of housing, workforce development, small business and entrepreneurship, and then largely kind of as an umbrella in community development finance. So we do a lot of kind of original research in these areas. We create tools that help to support the evidence that we're tracking, the sort of trends that we're seeing. And then we also spend a lot of time thinking about partnerships and solutions and ways to better foster that investment in low and moderate income communities, in keeping with the CRA kind of tradition that we came from, but also bringing in philanthropy and the CDFI community and a number of other partners. So the activities that we usually engage in to carry out this work include creating our own research reports. We do a lot of white papers, but also kind of smaller, like shorter blog length articles about different topics. And then of course, building tools, which I'll show you a number of in the following slides. We then use these tools and these products to convene together partners to have conversations around these issues. A lot of times that's around housing or workforce development, because that's really our areas of focus here in Atlanta. But it can be on other special topics too. We've done events on food systems, on healthy communities, a number of other things as well. Fair housing just came up recently. So again, I'm going to show you a bunch of tools, 4 from the Atlanta Fed, and then I think actually 3 from our partners around the other banks. As a general rule, you know, the Federal Reserve System is trying to provide these data in a digestible, intuitive way to a broad base of community development stakeholders. So typically that is your local governments, extension services are certainly part of that stakeholder group. We often work with nonprofits and community-based organizations, with real estate developers, financial institutions, and others who are advocates or intermediaries in these spaces. So we have, I'll show you a bunch of tools that most of them were built on Tableau, and there's a few reasons for that. I think The first is that we did a lot of training early on in this system. It tends to work well with our web design team and our development team. They're very familiar and very able to kind of quickly get these up and running. And on our end, we're able to design them, and we've been able to make good use of them. Although I think we're looking at, there's so many new technologies out there at expanding to other types of tools as well. So the first Atlanta Fed tool I just wanted to highlight is one that came out last November, and this is one of our housing-based tools. So again, those kind of bucket areas for Atlanta really kind of focus on housing and workforce development. This one was one that we did with the University of Florida Schimberg Center. For many years, they've put out a rental housing study for the state of Florida, and they were able to really expand that data to all 6 of our states. And so what this includes is really detailed information about renter households, how much they pay for rent. So are they cost burdened? Do they pay more than 30% of their income on housing? Or are they even what's called severely housing burdened, where they're paying more than 50% of their income on housing? And so you can kind of, as a local stakeholder, get a better understanding of just how unaffordable or affordable your community is. And so we break these data out by geographies like cities, metropolitan and micropolitan areas, as well as states. And then we also break it out or disaggregate it by income level. So you can see people at extremely low income, 30% of area median income and below, up to upper income folks. And obviously the need is greatest in those lower categories of income. So that's one of the tabs on the Tableau tool, and you can kind of mouse around on all of these mapping tools. You can pull up this kind of interface you see here, where you can see the city geography name and some basic statistics as you're scrolling around. You can also just see visually like the patterns, the spatial patterns of where affordability hotspots tend to be located. There are other tabs on this tool that allow you to see supply side issues. So how many units are, what is the deficit essentially of affordable units at these different income levels? And then there's another tab that allows you to just basically create an on-the-fly report for any particular geography with all of these data included. So that is our affordable rental tool. It will be updated. Right now it's 2015 data, which is slightly outdated, but we plan to update that this year with 2018 data. And it has been something that in our stakeholder groups, local governments have been using for benchmarking or understanding as they get together and think about affordable housing initiatives or policies or solutions. They're starting to use these data to think about, in the city of Atlanta, for example, there's a shortage of 28,000 units, and how do you kind of bridge that gap to start to understand how to produce that many units. A second tool that actually was just updated in the last few weeks is what we call the Small City Economic Dynamism Index. And it's actually not just small cities anymore. So it should be called Small to Mid-Size Economic Dynamism Index. We do include data for 816 different geographies, metropolitan and micropolitan areas, with up to 500,000 residents. This is national data. The first kind of tab, again, is a map where you can visually see, I think red is less dynamic, green is more dynamic. You can see where geographically areas of more dynamism tend to exist. And this is defined as really growth, economic and population growth within a community. What you can also see are the 13 underlying indicators in that index. So that's arguably something that might be more interesting, when you're thinking about benchmarking and looking at community data. So you can select up to 5 different metropolitan or micropolitan areas, as well as kind of the US median as a benchmark. And then you can kind of see in the bottom right-hand part of the slide that you can look at a time series of data on things like employment, inequality, the Gini coefficient. You can look at household income, building permits, population growth, startup rates, a number of different things that build into that Small City Economic Dynamism Index. And again, this has been used actually quite a bit by our bank leadership as like our president, Raphael Bostic, goes out into communities and talks to them about, some of the economic challenges within our district. But also, I think, especially the underlying data has been used by particularly local government actors in thinking about community needs and benchmarking against their peer cities. A third tool that we've we are in the process of updating now, and should be updated by May, just next month, is the Opportunity Occupations Monitor. So an opportunity occupation is defined as a job that doesn't require a bachelor's degree or above, so it could be an associate's degree or some other credential, but it pays above what is the regional median wage. So it's a good value, education-wise. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck. This tool actually allows you to determine the percentage of jobs and the types of jobs within certain geographies that meet those kinds of definitions, and that's for low skill and middle skill jobs. You can separate those out as well. So this is state level data. We also have metropolitan level data. Again, I think you can compare up to 5 different communities or geographies at once. And this is data that goes back from 2010 to 2016, so you can scroll and see any particular point in time or how this has changed. This is kind of the landing page, but if you select geographies and scroll down, that's when you're going to see more detailed information about what those careers are. Are they nursing assistants? Are they home health care workers? Are they preschool teachers? Things like that. There are a lot of different categories, and they change kind of geography by geography. And another product that is related to this that's come out, actually is already out, came out I think last week, are metro profiles that were put out by the Cleveland Fed on opportunity occupations. And they were done for 121 different metropolitan areas. So they're kind of like fact sheets. And if you go to the Cleveland Fed's Opportunity Occupations website, you can see, for maybe MSA you're interested in, what the top 10 opportunity occupations are, and the numbers, actually the numbers of positions that are open. I think that's current up to like 2018. And this has been really well. This has been taken up quite strongly by career counselors and actually high school counselors and some other community development folks working in the workforce space. So the last Atlanta Fed tool that I'll show is called Following the Money, and this has gotten a lot of attention from stakeholders like advocates and nonprofits. This allows you to look at grant volume per capita from NGOs or nonprofit organizations, as well as from HUD. And we're gonna have to speed up a little bit because I know I'm trying to get through 4 more tools. But this one, it has been great. Again, you can look at metropolitan areas. I think we've got about 400 metropolitan areas. You can look at, again, a time series 2009 to 2014 and do some comparisons of where those grant dollars are flowing. And part of the impetus for this was understanding that a lot of our district, the Southeast, is underserved by national philanthropy, and starting to unpack why that is and how we might be better at attracting it. And then the St. Louis Fed has a great tool that's somewhat similar in that it allows you to also track investments, in this case from CDFI, from the Treasury, the CDFI fund, as well as from IRS programs like the New Markets Tax Credits and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. Here you can do state, county, and MSA. Again, you can kind of like scroll down and see a number of time series, a number of snapshots as to how many dollars, I think either net dollars and per capita dollars, flowed into these different geographies over this time period from those programs. And these are basically 3 of the top community development investment programs in the country. So it's very useful information for, again, developers, nonprofits, and local government stakeholders. Just a couple more. Philly Fed has a great tool called the Consumer Credit Explorer, which uses the New York Fed's Equifax data, which is like a 5% sample of folks with a credit history. And here you can really drill down into state, metro areas, as well as non-metro areas of states to look at, by age, what are the credit conditions or credit utilization, what percentages of these populations are delinquent on their debt. You can also break up the debt by auto, home, student loan debt. You can look at prime versus non-prime. So a lot of different ways to cut the data and understand credit conditions within your community. And then finally, if you aren't familiar with Fred, and many people I think are a bit more familiar with Fred, this is from the St. Louis Fed. It's a wonderful tool, really just for more baseline economic data, national, international, and in some cases micro data on metropolitan areas or states. But it has hundreds of thousands of indicators on things like, here we have home ownership. You've got things like business sector data, banking data. You've got price index data, anything you might be interested in to use in some of your reporting. And one of the great things is you can export these lovely graphics with your recession bars already included and the time series plotted out for you. And there's also a map-based version of this called GeoFred, where you can pull up statewide data and I think countywide data for some indicators as well. So Fred and GeoFred are also great resources from the St. Louis Fed. And with that, this is just a couple landing pages to take note of, and hopefully you'll get all of these slides. You don't have to write down any of these URLs, and they'll be shared with you later. But fedcommunities.org is the best place to get information about community development specific resources from all across the Fed, the 12 banks plus the board. We also have our own web page with a landing page for all of our data and tools. So as we develop new tools, you'll be able to find them on our web page at this sub tab. And that's all I have, so thank you very much. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Chris and Charlie as well. We will take some questions, and I did see a couple of things in the chat box.
Yeah, so we had some going all the way back to our first presenter, Charlie. We had one actually from Chris, but I'll read it out loud anyway. Are you sharing the output via the free public interface or through a paid public server license that your organization hosts?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually tried both. We now have a license, but when we started using Tableau, we got the free trial, and so we were able to do some stuff with the free trial. But we ended up, because of the limitations of that and the time period, we had to get the paid license eventually. So.
Awesome. And we had another question for Charlie. Were the architects, or how were the architects paid, rather?
Yeah, good question as well. We partnered with an organization called Plan New Hampshire, and it's a group of, an organization that does design charrettes for communities. But they have a number of architects that volunteer their time for free. So we had probably 20 architects and designers and artists that came out to that event. And it was all part of their contribution of their companies and their firms. So it was all volunteer labor.
We had someone just comment, the Zoho reports is a good and free alternative to Tableau. Can you speak on that a little, Charlie, if you have any experience with that?
I don't have any experience with Zoho reports. I'd love to learn more about it, though. So.
Sorry, I'm trying to go back through everything.
Oh, I was also supposed to say that there's an evaluation that everybody should fill out after this presentation.
Yes, that's a great point, Anne. And we do have a quick Qualtrics survey for you guys to fill out if you have a moment. I'm going to put that link into the chat box, so you can go ahead and hit that direct link and go ahead and fill out your survey while everything is fresh in your mind. We had someone say that the FRB Atlanta URLs aren't working on the bank's website. Anne, do you know anything about that?
No, I will check it out right now. Any specific tool, or they're saying the entire website?
It did not clarify. Kent Olson, if you'd like to clarify or give more details on that so Anne can look into it, we would be appreciative.
Oh, I see. Yeah, actually, there's a problem. It's not the website, but there seems to be a problem with the RESTful affordability tool. Sorry about that. That's embarrassing, and I will look into that as soon as I get off the phone.
Chris, you had just a comment in here about the Ag MRC Marketmaker project. Would you like to go into that a little bit if you want to read that comment?
Oh yeah, just the question had been, if our stuff was just focused on Iowa, and Data for Decision Makers is just an Iowa product, but as is IGFI. Those can be modeled, imagine, and used by their states if they wanted to contact us and work with us on that. But the Marketmaker, an AgMark product, that will be a national tool available through both AgMark and Marketmaker.
Were there any more questions? Feel free to type them in now. or if you're feeling brave, turn on your microphone and ask us the question.
I had a question for Anne. This is Sridhar Upendram. Can you tell a little bit about the source of data for the Opportunity Occupations Monitor?
Sure, as much as I know. So I believe they use Burning Glass data to get the positions that are currently listed, and so this is over a historical data as well as current data, and that includes the qualifications that are needed, the credentials that are needed, and that's how they're able to determine whether or not they need a BA versus a 2-year degree or some kind of certificate. So Burning Glass, but it's also then combined with, I think, BEA, BLS, and ACS census data. So it's a bit of a mix to get at the ratios and indicators that are the underlying data. And that is all explained in the metadata. So if you have questions, so please, further questions, reach out to me.
Awesome. So we'll give everyone just a few more minutes if they're crafting their question. And while they do that, I want to just say thank you to all of our presenters for taking your time to be here with us. And thank you to everyone who was on our webinar listening and participating and asking questions. We appreciate you as well. I put in the link for the evaluation. I also put in the link for the recording. Full disclosure, our university is having some internet problems, so that link might not work for you right this second, but save it. I promise it will work later. We're having some glitches here in Mississippi State, but that's okay. Any other additional questions?
No, I would just say, Anne, I really, the data sets that you shared were really powerful, and I think we can use in our work here in the Northeast, and as well as around the country. But I would love to find ways to collaborate with the Federal Reserve. It's difficult to know where the entry point is, because I think you were saying that the programs differ somewhat by region, but it would be really helpful to have a sit down at some point with the feds.
Yeah, and I encourage anyone, my email address is still up there, so if there's a particular, if you're in Minnesota, if you're in Oregon, we can direct you to the right people. But certainly, Charlie, you and I will have a follow-up question about your specific questions you had earlier too.
Yeah.
That sounds excellent. So, looks like we don't have any other questions. A bit of a quiet bunch today, but that's okay. So we will go ahead and, here we just got one, just as I was saying that. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that had links in it? Presenters, how do you feel about sharing your slides?
Totally fine, that's great. And please do check back later. Hopefully we can get, I think our website, they're looking at it right now, so apologize for that snafu.
Awesome, so if all presenters are okay with it, we can certainly send out those slides to all the participants. That should not be a problem.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we will let everyone get back to their busy days. And once again, thank you to all of our presenters and participants. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.